The phone call came at 7:15 in the morning on January 16th, and I knew immediately it was going to be trouble because nobody calls that early unless something's gone catastrophically wrong. I was right. Mr. Grayson, this is Patricia Henderson from the Meadowbrook HOA board. We need to discuss an urgent matter regarding propane delivery to our community. I took a sip of my coffee and leaned back in my kitchen chair, looking out at the snow-covered landscape of rural Montana. My propane storage facility sat about 300 yards from my house, a collection of large white tanks surrounded by chain-link fencing. It had been in my family for 30 years, and I'd taken over operations 5 years ago when my father retired to Arizona. What seems to be the problem, Mrs. Henderson? The problem, Mr. Grayson, is that Alpine Propane tried to deliver to several homes in our community yesterday, and they informed us they can't access our area without going through your facility. Something about exclusive distribution rights in this region? I smiled despite myself. This conversation was long overdue. That's correct. My facility holds the only commercial propane storage license for this entire valley. Any company that wants to deliver propane to homes west of Route 47 has to purchase from me wholesale. It's been that way since 1995. There was a long pause on the other end. That can't be legal. That's a monopoly. It's perfectly legal, Mrs. Henderson. The County Planning Commission designated this area for single-source propane distribution due to the terrain and safety concerns. You can verify it with the Montana Public Service Commission if you'd like. My father fought for that designation after the Jenkins fire in 1994. You remember that? I moved here in 2019, she said stiffly. But that doesn't explain why Alpine Propane is charging us nearly double what residents in Kalispell are paying. Alpine is probably marking up prices because they have to buy from me and transport it an additional 15 miles into your development. That's business, Mrs. Henderson. If you want better rates, you could contract directly with my facility. I deliver to individual homes for a very reasonable fee. We'll see about that. The HOA board will be discussing this matter at our meeting tomorrow night. I expect we'll be consulting with attorneys. She hung up without saying goodbye, and I set my phone down on the table. My golden retriever, Buck, padded over and rested his head on my knee, sensing my tension. Well, boy, I said, scratching behind his ears, I think we just kicked a hornet's nest. The Meadowbrook development had gone up 3 years ago, a collection of 200 identical houses built by some California developer who thought Montana was the next big thing. They'd carved out a chunk of forest land and thrown up these cookie-cutter homes, each one priced at $500,000, marketed to remote workers and retirees looking for mountain living. The HOA was notoriously strict, full of rules about fence heights, approved paint colors, and how many vehicles you could park in your driveway. My property sat just outside their boundaries, thank God. I owned 40 acres that had been in my family since the 1970s, and when the developers came sniffing around, I told them where they could stick their offer. They built around me, which meant their western edge backed right up against my land. The access road they used wound through county property that bordered my facility. I'd never had issues with Meadowbrook residents before. Most of them got their propane from me anyway, smaller deliveries for their furnaces and water heaters. I charged fair prices and always showed up when I said I would. But apparently, someone on their HOA board had gotten ambitious and tried to broker a bulk deal with Alpine Propane out of Missoula, probably thinking they could save money by cutting me out as the middleman. That wasn't going to work, and now they knew it. The next day was Sunday, and I spent most of it doing routine maintenance on my tanks and checking inventory levels. January was peak season for propane demand, everyone trying to heat their homes through the brutal Montana winter. The temperature had been hovering around 15 degrees for the past week, and the forecast called for even colder weather ahead. Around 4 in the afternoon, I got another call, this time from a number I didn't recognize. Marcus Grayson? Speaking. This is Elaine Otterman. I live in Meadowbrook, and I'm on the HOA board. I wanted to reach out privately before tonight's meeting. Her voice sounded different from Patricia Henderson's, less confrontational, more concerned. I decided to hear her out. I'm listening. Look, I'll be honest with you. Patricia is pretty worked up about this propane situation. She's convinced you're price gouging, and she wants to pursue legal action. But I've done some research, and it looks like you're right about the county regulations. I'm trying to understand what our options are here. I appreciated the straightforward approach. Your options are pretty simple, Ms. Otterman. You can keep working with Alpine or any other company, but they'll have to buy from me wholesale, which means you'll pay marked up prices, or you can contract directly with my facility. I'll match whatever Alpine was originally quoting you, probably come in lower. I deliver twice a week to your area anyway. What kind of volume are we talking about? We'd need to supply around 150 homes. Not a problem. I've got storage capacity for 80,000 gallons, and I can restock from my suppliers in Butte within 48 hours. In January, I'd estimate your community uses about 12,000 gallons per week, maybe more if we get a cold snap. I can handle that easily. She was quiet for a moment. Why didn't you approach us before, when we were first setting up our propane contracts? That was a fair question. Because I don't do aggressive marketing, Ms. Otterman. I've got enough business to keep me comfortable, and I figured if people wanted to work with me, they'd ask. Plus, no offense, but your HOA has a reputation for being difficult to work with. I heard about what happened with your landscaping contractor last summer. She laughed, a short, rueful sound. Yeah, that was a mess. Patricia again. She accused them of damaging her precious Japanese maple and withheld payment. They sued us and won. It was embarrassing. So you see why I might not have been eager to jump into bed with Meadowbrook HOA. Fair enough, but we need propane, Mr. Grayson. And from what you're saying, you're the only game in town. I'd rather work out a reasonable agreement than watch Patricia drag us into an expensive legal battle we can't win. I liked Elaine already. Tell you what, come by my facility tomorrow morning, say around 10. Bring whoever else from the board wants to see the operation. I'll show you around, explain how everything works, and we can talk numbers. If it makes sense for everyone, we'll draw up a contract. I'll do that. Thank you, Marcus. I appreciate you being reasonable about this. One thing, though, I added, I need to know I'm dealing with someone who has authority to make decisions. If Patricia is going to override everything, there's no point in negotiating. Patricia is the HOA president, but the board votes on major decisions. There are 5 of us, and Patricia only gets her way when she can convince people she's right. I don't think she'll be able to do that with this propane thing. The facts are pretty clear. We hung up, and I felt a bit better about the situation. Maybe this would work out after all. That optimism lasted exactly 12 hours. Monday morning arrived with fresh snow and temperatures in the single digits. I was up early, plowing the access road to my facility and making sure everything was clear for Elaine's visit. At 9:30, I saw a convoy of 3 vehicles coming up the road, far more than I'd expected. The first car was a silver Lexus SUV, and Patricia Henderson emerged from the driver's seat like a general preparing for battle. She was probably in her mid-50s, blonde hair sprayed into submission, wearing a parka that probably cost more than my truck payment. Behind her came Elaine in a sensible Subaru, and then a BMW driven by a man in an expensive suit. Mr. Grayson, Patricia announced, marching toward me without preamble. This is Richard Vaughn, the HOA's attorney. He'll be sitting in on our discussion today. So that's how it was going to be. I nodded at the lawyer, who at least had the decency to look uncomfortable about the whole situation. Elaine got out of her car with an apologetic shrug. Let's go inside where it's warm, I said, gesturing toward the small office building attached to my facility. I'll put on some coffee. The office was nothing fancy, just a desk, some filing cabinets, and a conference table I'd picked up at an estate sale. But it was clean and functional, which was all I needed. I poured coffee for everyone, while Patricia made a show of examining everything like she was looking for health code violations. So, I said, settling into my chair, Elaine mentioned you wanted to discuss propane supply for Meadowbrook. I'm happy to work out an agreement if the terms make sense. Richard the lawyer opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. Mr. Grayson, we've reviewed the county regulations you mentioned, and while it's true you hold the distribution license for this area, we believe there are grounds to challenge the monopolistic nature of that arrangement. Montana state law prohibits anti-competitive business practices, and we think a court would find that your exclusive license violates those statutes. I'd expected this. Feel free to challenge it, Mr. Vaughn. But you should know that license has been challenged twice before, once in 1998 and again in 2007. Both times, the courts upheld it. The public safety rationale is pretty solid. This valley has unique geological features that make propane storage and distribution risky. Having a single, well-regulated facility is safer than having multiple companies running propane trucks through these mountain roads all winter. The county commission's decision was based on recommendations from the state fire marshal's office. Patricia leaned forward. That's convenient for you, isn't it? You get to control all the propane and charge whatever you want. I charge market rates, Mrs. Henderson. You're welcome to compare my prices to what you'd pay in any other rural Montana community. I'm actually on the lower end. My overhead is minimal because I own the land outright and I run a lean operation, just me and one part-time employee. Alpine Propane quoted us 19 cents per gallon, less than what you're charging. Alpine quoted you their Kalispell rates, I'm guessing. They didn't factor in the wholesale cost of buying from me or the extra transportation. When they realized they'd have to purchase through my facility, they adjusted their quote, didn't they? That's why you're sitting here right now instead of happily doing business with them. Elaine spoke up. He's right, Patricia. Alpine's revised quote came in 7 cents per gallon higher than what Marcus charges for direct delivery. I checked. Patricia's face flushed. This is extortion. We should be able to choose our own suppliers. You can choose whoever you want, I said calmly. But they all have to go through me. That's the reality of operating in this valley. Now, we can spend the next year fighting about it in court, wasting everyone's time and money, or we can work out a contract that benefits everyone. Your choice. Richard cleared his throat. What kind of terms are you proposing, Mr. Grayson? I slid a piece of paper across the table. I drew up some numbers last night based on estimated usage. For Meadowbrook's volume, I can offer a 5% discount off my standard residential rates. Guaranteed delivery twice weekly. Emergency service available within 4 hours for an additional fee. Contract term of 2 years with an option to renew. Pricing adjusts annually based on my wholesale costs, capped at 3% above inflation. If wholesale prices go down, your rates go down proportionally. Elaine picked up the paper and studied it, then passed it to Richard. The lawyer's eyebrows went up slightly. This is actually quite reasonable, he admitted. No, it's not, Patricia snapped. It's still higher than what we could get in a competitive market. But we're not in a competitive market, Elaine said, her patience clearly wearing thin. We're in a geographic area with special regulations. Marcus has explained why those regulations exist, and they make sense. We can either accept reality or bankrupt the HOA fighting a legal battle we're probably going to lose. Patricia stood up abruptly. I need to discuss this with the full board. Mr. Grayson, we'll be in touch with our decision. She stormed out, leaving Elaine and Richard to exchange awkward glances. Richard gathered up his papers and offered me a handshake. For what it's worth, I think you're being fair. I'll recommend the board accept these terms, but Patricia has a lot of influence with some of the other members. This might take a few days to sort out. After they left, I sat in my office and stared out the window at the snow. Part of me wondered if I should have been more accommodating, maybe offered a bigger discount to smooth things over. But I'd been in business long enough to know that caving to unreasonable demands only encouraged more unreasonable demands. My prices were fair, my service was reliable, and I wasn't going to apologize for either one. The rest of Monday passed quietly. I made a few local deliveries, checked the weather forecast, and had dinner while watching a Grizzlies game. Everything seemed fine. Tuesday morning, I learned just how wrong that assumption was. I woke up to my phone ringing at 6 in the morning. It was Tom Breslin, one of my regular customers who lived on the eastern edge of Meadowbrook. Marcus, I don't know if you've heard, but the HOA sent out an email last night. They're prohibiting residents from contracting directly with your facility. They're saying we all have to go through Alpine Propane as the HOA's official supplier. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. They can't do that. Individual homeowners have the right to choose their own propane supplier. The email says it's in the HOA covenants, something about approved vendors for major services. They're claiming propane falls under that category, just like landscaping and snow removal. That's bullshit, Tom. Propane isn't a community service, it's an individual utility. They can't force you to use a specific company. Well, the email says there's a $500 fine for any resident who violates the approved vendor policy. Patricia Henderson sent it, and she copied the HOA attorney. I thanked Tom for the heads up and immediately called Elaine Otterman. She answered on the third ring, sounding stressed. I know why you're calling, Marcus. I tried to stop her. Patricia called an emergency board meeting last night after we left your facility. She convinced 2 of the other board members that we needed to take a hard line. They voted 3-2 to mandate Alpine as the exclusive provider and prohibit residents from working with you directly. That's illegal, Elaine. She can't do that. I told her the same thing. So did Richard Vaughn, actually. He was pretty clear that the HOA doesn't have authority to dictate utility providers. But Patricia doesn't care. She thinks you're ripping people off, and she's determined to prove a point. What happens now? Richard is drafting a memo explaining why the board's decision is likely unenforceable. I'm going to circulate it and call for another vote. But in the meantime, Patricia's email went out to all 200 households in Meadowbrook. People are confused and scared about getting fined. I felt my jaw tighten. Alpine can't even deliver to your community right now. They still need to buy from me wholesale, and they haven't agreed to terms. What are people supposed to do when they run out of propane? I don't think Patricia thought that far ahead. She's just angry and acting impulsively. This is going to turn into a disaster. I know, Elaine said quietly. I'm doing what I can, Marcus. Just give me a few days to sort this out. I spent Tuesday making phone calls. First to my attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Sarah Chen who practiced in Missoula. She listened to the situation and confirmed what I already suspected. HOAs have broad authority over common areas and architectural standards, but they can't interfere with individual property owners' rights to contract for utilities. Montana law is pretty clear on that. If they try to enforce this policy, affected homeowners could sue the HOA for exceeding their authority. You might have grounds for a tortious interference claim too, since they're actively trying to prevent you from doing business. I don't want to sue anybody, Sarah. I just want to deliver propane and not deal with drama. Unfortunately, Patricia Henderson seems determined to create drama, document everything, save all the emails, keep records of any customers who tell you they're being pressured by the HOA. If this escalates, you'll want evidence. My next call was to Alpine Propane. I reached their operations manager, a guy named Dave who I'd known casually for years. Dave, what's going on with this Meadowbrook situation? Are you actually planning to service them? He sighed. Marcus, I'm going to be straight with you. Patricia Henderson contacted us a month ago about a bulk contract. We gave her a quote based on our standard rates, not knowing about your facility's distribution license. When we found out we'd have to buy wholesale from you, we adjusted the quote. She lost her mind, accused us of bait and switch, threatened to report us to the State Commerce Department. It's been a nightmare. So you're not actually going to supply them? We can't make the numbers work. Even buying from you wholesale, we'd barely break even by the time we factor in transportation and labor. And now Patricia is demanding we give her the original quote we made by mistake. We told her no, and she's threatening to sue us too. She's threatening to sue everyone, apparently. Look, Marcus, you and I have always had a good working relationship. I don't want to get in the middle of this mess. As far as I'm concerned, Meadowbrook is your territory. We'll stick to our usual service area. That was a relief, at least, but it also meant that Meadowbrook residents were in limbo, caught between an HOA policy that prohibited them from using my service and a supposed alternative supplier that wasn't actually going to deliver. Wednesday brought the cold snap I'd been dreading. Temperatures plunged to 10 below zero overnight, and the forecast called for even colder weather through the weekend. My phone started ringing around 8 in the morning. First call was from Jennifer Walsh, a Meadowbrook resident with 2 young kids. Mr. Grayson, I'm so sorry to bother you, but our propane tank is reading at 15%. We usually refill at 25%, but with this email from the HOA, I didn't know what to do. I called Alpine like the email said, and they told me they're not servicing our area yet. I'm worried we're going to run out. What's your address, Mrs. Walsh? She gave it to me, and I checked my schedule. I can have you filled by 2 this afternoon. Don't worry about the HOA policy. That's between me and them. Your family needs heat. But the email said there's a fine. Let them try to fine you. I'll put you in touch with my attorney if it comes to that. Right now, your priority is keeping your kids warm." The relief in her voice was palpable. "Thank you so much. I'll be home all day." That call was followed by 6 more, all Meadowbrook residents in similar situations. Some were running low on propane, others were just confused about what they were supposed to do. I scheduled deliveries for everyone who needed them and made a note to talk to Sarah Chen about the potential liability. Around noon, I got a call that made my blood pressure spike. "Mr. Grayson, this is Patricia Henderson. I've been informed that you're scheduling deliveries in Meadowbrook despite the board's clear directive. This is a direct violation of our community policies." "Mrs. Henderson, with all due respect, your community policies don't supersede state law or individual property rights. Homeowners have the right to contract with any licensed propane supplier, and I'm not going to let families freeze because you're on a power trip." "How dare you speak to me that way? I'm the president of this HOA, and I'm acting in the best interests of our community." "You're acting in your own interests, and you're going to get people hurt. It's 10 below zero, Patricia. People need heat. If you want to sue me, go ahead, but I'm going to keep delivering propane to anyone who asks for it. You'll be hearing from our attorney." She slammed the phone down, and I took a deep breath to calm myself. Buck wandered over and put his head in my lap, sensing my frustration. "I know, boy. Some people just want to watch the world burn." I spent the rest of Wednesday making deliveries, driving my truck with its 1,000-gallon tank through the frozen landscape. Every customer I met was grateful and apologetic, embarrassed by their HOA's behavior. Several of them told me they'd been complaining to the board, but Patricia was stonewalling any discussion. Thursday morning brought a new development. I was eating breakfast when I saw a sheriff's department SUV pull up to my facility. My stomach dropped, wondering what Patricia had done now. Deputy Martinez stepped out, a guy I knew from the local diner. He looked uncomfortable. "Marcus, sorry to bother you early. I've got a complaint I need to follow up on." "Let me guess. Patricia Henderson." "You got it. She filed a report claiming you're trespassing on Meadowbrook property to make deliveries and harassing residents." "That's completely false. I'm delivering to individual homes at their request, using public roads and their private driveways. I haven't set foot on any common HOA property, and I certainly haven't harassed anyone." Martinez nodded. "Yeah, I figured as much. But I had to come out and investigate. Do you have any documentation of the deliveries? Work orders, signed receipts, that kind of thing?" I brought him into my office and showed him my delivery logs, complete with customer signatures and timestamps. He took photos with his phone and made some notes. "This should be fine. Honestly, Marcus, this looks like a civil dispute, not a criminal matter. The HOA lady seems to think she can use law enforcement to settle her business disagreements, but that's not how it works. I'll file my report and let her know there's no evidence of trespassing or harassment." "Thanks, Carlos. I appreciate you being reasonable about this. Just doing my job, but between you and me, you might want to get a lawyer involved. This Henderson woman seems pretty determined to cause problems." After he left, I called Sarah Chen and filled her in on the latest developments. She was not amused. "Marcus, this is getting serious. Patricia Henderson is filing false police reports and interfering with your business operations. I think we need to send a cease and desist letter, put her on notice that her behavior could result in legal action." "Will that help or just make her angrier?" "Probably both. But right now, we need to establish a paper trail showing that you've tried to resolve this professionally. If it ends up in court, you want to be able to demonstrate that you were reasonable and she was not." I authorized Sarah to draft the letter, feeling the situation spiral further out of my control. All I'd wanted was to run my business in peace. Now I was dealing with lawyers, sheriff's deputies, and an HOA president who seemed to have declared war on me personally. Friday brought the kind of cold that makes you question why anyone lives in Montana. 20 below zero when I woke up, with wind chills pushing it even lower. My truck struggled to start, and I spent half an hour thawing frozen equipment at my facility before I could begin deliveries. The phone calls started early. More Meadowbrook residents running low on propane, some of them in genuinely desperate situations. An elderly couple whose tank was down to 8%. A family with a newborn baby. A disabled veteran who couldn't leave his home. I triaged the emergencies and mapped out a delivery route, knowing it was going to be a long, brutal day. But as I was loading up the truck, I saw another convoy of vehicles coming up the road to my facility. This time it was worse. Patricia Henderson led the charge again, but she'd brought backup. Behind her Lexus were two news vans, one from a Missoula station and one from Kalispell. And bringing up the rear was a truck with Alpine Propane logos on the side. I waited by my truck as the circus unfolded. A reporter and cameraman hopped out of each van, and Patricia positioned herself like she was about to hold a press conference. The Alpine truck stayed back, the driver looking uncertain about what was happening. "Mr. Grayson," Patricia announced loudly, clearly playing to the cameras, "these representatives from the media are here to document your monopolistic business practices and the way you're exploiting Meadowbrook residents. We've arranged for Alpine Propane to make deliveries today, and we're demanding that you allow them access to your storage facility to purchase propane wholesale as required by law." I looked at the reporter from Missoula, a young woman bundled up against the cold. "Are you actually covering this? It's 20 below zero and I've got emergency deliveries to make." She looked embarrassed. "Mrs. Henderson contacted our newsroom claiming there was a propane shortage crisis affecting 200 families. We came to investigate." "There's no shortage," I said flatly. "There's an HOA president who's refusing to let me do my job. Every family that's called me has gotten propane. The only crisis is the one Patricia is creating." Patricia's face went red. "That's a lie. You're charging exorbitant prices and holding our community hostage." "My prices are public record, Mrs. Henderson. Anyone can compare them to other rural suppliers in Montana, and I've never refused service to anyone." One of the reporters turned to Patricia. "What exactly are you alleging, Mrs. Henderson? Do you have evidence of price gouging?" She fumbled with her phone, pulling up some kind of spreadsheet. "Look at these numbers. Alpine Propane quoted us 19 cents per gallon, less than what Grayson charges." "For Kalispell delivery," I interjected. "Not for this valley. Alpine had to revise their quote once they understood the logistics. Ask their driver." Everyone turned to look at the Alpine truck. The driver, who I didn't recognize, got out reluctantly. "I'm just here because dispatch sent me," he said. "They told me to try to negotiate a wholesale purchase. I don't know anything about the pricing dispute." "So you're not actually here to make deliveries to residents?" the reporter asked. "I can't make deliveries until we establish wholesale purchasing terms with Mr. Grayson's facility. That's above my pay grade." Patricia looked like she was about to explode. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. He controls everything. We have no choice but to pay whatever he demands." "That's how licensed monopolies work, Mrs. Henderson," I said, my patience finally running out. "The county granted my facility exclusive distribution rights for public safety reasons. You don't like it? Take it up with the county commission. But right now, I've got families who need propane in 20 below weather, and I'm done playing games." I turned to the Alpine driver. "You want to establish wholesale terms? Call my office and set up a meeting with my attorney. We'll work out an agreement. But I'm not negotiating on camera in the middle of a cold snap." Then I climbed into my truck and started the engine. The reporters were peppering Patricia with questions as I drove away, but I didn't care anymore. I had work to do. The rest of Friday was a blur of deliveries, house after house, grateful customers, malfunctioning equipment that needed attention in the brutal cold. I didn't get home until after 8 that night, exhausted and half frozen. Buck greeted me at the door, and I fed him before collapsing on the couch. My phone buzzed with a text from Elaine Otterman. I saw the news coverage. Patricia looked unhinged. "Emergency board meeting tomorrow morning. I think we finally have the votes to override her." I texted back a thanks and turned on the local news. Sure enough, there was Patricia on my television screen, mid-rant about monopolies and exploitation. But the reporter had done her homework. The segment included interviews with actual Meadowbrook residents, most of whom praised my service and expressed frustration with the HOA's interference. They'd also contacted the Montana Public Service Commission, which confirmed that my facility's license was legitimate and not under any kind of investigation. The segment made Patricia look exactly as unhinged as Elaine had described. I felt a grim satisfaction watching it, even though I knew this still wasn't over. Saturday morning, I slept in for the first time all week. When I finally dragged myself out of bed around 9, my phone was already full of messages. Most were from Meadowbrook residents thanking me for yesterday's deliveries. But one stood out. It was from Richard Vaughn, the HOA attorney. Mr. Grayson, please call me at your earliest convenience. We need to discuss a resolution to this situation. I made coffee and called him back, bracing for whatever came next. Marcus, thanks for getting back to me. I'll cut to the chase. The HOA board met this morning and voted to rescind the approved vendor policy. You're free to contract directly with any Meadowbrook residents who want your service. Additionally, the board would like to negotiate a bulk purchasing agreement with your facility for common area propane needs and any residents who choose to participate. Patricia Henderson has been removed as HOA president, effective immediately. I let that sink in for a moment. What changed? A combination of things. The news coverage was embarrassing for the community. Several residents threatened to sue the HOA over the vendor policy. And, frankly, the other board members realized Patricia was acting irrationally and putting them at legal risk. Elaine Otterman is now the interim president, and she's authorized me to negotiate reasonable terms with you. What about Patricia? Is she going to accept this? Richard was quiet for a moment. Patricia is claiming the board acted improperly and threatening to challenge the vote, but she doesn't have a leg to stand on. The board followed proper procedures, and the decision is final. I expect she'll make noise for a while, but legally, there's nothing she can do. We spent the next 30 minutes discussing contract terms. I agreed to the pricing I'd originally proposed, with a few modifications that made sense for both parties. Richard said he'd draw up a formal agreement for review, and we scheduled a meeting for Monday to finalize everything. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling like I'd just survived a tornado. Buck came over and put his head on my knee, and I scratched behind his ears absently. Think it's really over, boy? Buck wagged his tail, optimistic as always. I wished I shared his confidence. The weekend passed quietly, a welcome change from the chaos of the previous week. I caught up on maintenance, restocked inventory, and tried to relax. The weather had warmed up to a balmy 5 above zero, which felt positively tropical after the cold snap. Monday morning, I drove to the Meadowbrook Community Center for the contract signing. Elaine Otterman met me at the door, looking tired but relieved. Marcus, thank you for coming, and thank you for being patient with us. This whole situation got way out of hand. Not your fault, Elaine. You tried to do the right thing from the start. Richard Vaughn was waiting inside with contracts printed and ready for signature. We went through each section carefully, making sure everyone understood the terms. The agreement covered bulk propane purchases for the next 2 years, with pricing formulas tied to wholesale costs and delivery schedules that worked for everyone. I was signing the last page when the door burst open and Patricia Henderson stormed in, her face twisted with rage. This is illegal. The board didn't have authority to remove me. I'm still the president of this HOA. Elaine stood up calmly. Patricia, you need to leave. This is a private meeting. I'm not going anywhere. You people staged a coup, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it. I'm contacting the state HOA ombudsman, and I'm filing complaints against all of you. Richard gathered up his papers with practiced patience. Mrs. Henderson, as I explained to you on Saturday, the board followed proper procedures in accordance with the HOA bylaws. You were removed for cause after multiple complaints about your conduct. If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll call the sheriff's department for trespassing. Trespassing? This is my community. You're a resident, not an employee or officer of the HOA. You have no authority to be at this meeting. Last warning, Patricia. She looked around the room, seeming to realize that no one was going to support her. Her eyes landed on me, and I saw pure hatred there. This is all your fault, she hissed. You manipulated everyone, turned them against me, but I'm not done. You're going to regret this. She turned and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Everyone sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Should we be worried about that? I asked. Richard shook his head. Patricia has no legal recourse. She might file some frivolous complaints or threaten to sue, but she won't get anywhere. The board's decision was solid, and we documented everything. She's just angry and lashing out. We finished signing the contracts, and I left feeling like a weight had been lifted. The propane supply issue was resolved. I had a fair agreement in place, and Patricia was no longer in a position to cause problems. Everything was going to be fine. I should have known better. Tuesday afternoon, I was at my facility doing paperwork when I heard vehicles approaching. Multiple vehicles moving fast. I looked out the window and saw 3 Sheriff's Department SUVs followed by an unmarked sedan. My heart sank as Deputy Martinez got out, along with 2 other deputies I didn't know and a man in a suit who had detective written all over him. "Marcus Grayson?" the detective called out. "That's me. What's going on?" "I'm Detective Warren with the County Sheriff's Office. We have a warrant to search your facility. We've received allegations that you've been operating in violation of state safety regulations and storing propane in excess of your license capacity." I felt my stomach drop. That's completely false. All my tanks are inspected annually, and I keep detailed inventory records. Who made these allegations? The complaint came from a Patricia Henderson. She claims to have evidence that you're operating unsafely and putting the community at risk. Of course it did. Patricia wasn't done after all. "Detective, I'll cooperate fully. All my records are in my office, and you're welcome to inspect the facility, but I'm also calling my attorney right now." "That's your right, Mr. Grayson." I called Sarah Chen while the deputies started looking around. She told me to stay calm, cooperate completely, and document everything. The detective seemed professional enough, going through my files methodically while other deputies examined the tanks and equipment. The search took 3 hours. They photographed everything, took copies of my inventory logs and maintenance records, and had a fire inspector come out to evaluate the facility. I stood by and answered questions, feeling violated even though I had nothing to hide. Finally, Detective Warren came back to my office where I'd been waiting. "Mr. Grayson, I've reviewed your documentation and consulted with the fire inspector. Everything appears to be in order. Your facility is properly licensed, your tanks are within capacity limits, and your safety systems meet or exceed state requirements. I'm going to recommend no charges be filed." The relief was overwhelming. "What happens to Patricia Henderson? She made false allegations that led to this search. I'll be having a conversation with Mrs. Henderson about filing false reports. If we determine she knowingly made false statements, she could face charges. But that's a separate investigation." After they left, I sat in my office, shaking with residual adrenaline. Sarah called back to check on me, and I filled her in. "Marcus, this has gone beyond a business dispute. Patricia Henderson is harassing you, and she's using law enforcement as a weapon. I'm going to file for a restraining order. This needs to stop before someone gets hurt." "Do you really think it's necessary?" "Yes. Her behavior is escalating. First the false police reports about trespassing, now this bogus safety complaint that triggered a major search. What's next? We need to protect you legally." I authorized her to file the restraining order, feeling the situation spiral even further. All because I controlled propane distribution in a valley, and Patricia Henderson couldn't stand not getting her way. The next few days were tense. The restraining order was filed on Wednesday, with a hearing scheduled for the following week. Sarah included detailed documentation of Patricia's actions, the false police reports, the harassment, the bogus safety complaint, and her threatening statements after being removed as HOA president. Meanwhile, I tried to keep running my business. The contract with Meadowbrook was working well. I'd set up a delivery schedule that kept everyone supplied, and residents seemed happy with the service. Several people apologized for Patricia's behavior, embarrassed by what their former HOA president had done. Thursday afternoon, I got a call from Elaine Otterman, and her voice was shaking. "Marcus, we have a serious problem. Patricia broke into the HOA office last night and destroyed a bunch of files. She also vandalized the computers, deleted emails and financial records. The police are here now taking a report." "Jesus Christ, is she trying to get arrested?" "I think she's having some kind of breakdown. Her husband called me this morning and said she's been obsessing over you in the HOA 24/7. He's worried about her mental state, but she won't listen to reason." "What did she destroy? Anything related to our propane contract?" "She targeted files related to the board vote that removed her and the new vendor agreements, but we have backups, so she didn't actually accomplish anything except commit a crime." "Have you told your attorney?" "Richard is on his way. He's going to make sure the police have everything they need to press charges. Marcus, I'm so sorry you got dragged into this. Patricia's vendetta against you has poisoned everything." "It's not your fault, Elaine. You've been trying to do the right thing from the start. Just focus on protecting your community and let the legal system handle Patricia." That evening, I learned that Patricia had been arrested for burglary and criminal mischief. She'd been released on bond, but the charges were serious. Richard Vaughn had provided the police with security footage showing Patricia breaking into the HOA office and destroying property. There was no question about her guilt. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for Monday, January 31st. Sarah Chen had prepared a comprehensive case documenting every instance of Patricia's harassment and threatening behavior. We had phone records, emails, witness statements, and police reports. It should have been straightforward, but nothing about this situation had been straightforward. Monday morning, I arrived at the county courthouse to find Patricia Henderson already there, accompanied by a lawyer I didn't recognize. She looked haggard, like she hadn't slept in days, and she was clutching a thick folder of papers. The hearing was before Judge Carlson, a stern woman in her 60s who had a reputation for no-nonsense rulings. Sarah and I sat at one table, Patricia and her lawyer at another. The courtroom was small, just a few other people waiting for their own hearings. Judge Carlson called the case and reviewed Sarah's petition. Then she looked at Patricia's lawyer. "Counselor, does your client oppose this restraining order?" Patricia's lawyer, a nervous-looking man named Mitchell, stood up. "Your Honor, Mrs. Henderson maintains that she's been the victim in this situation, not the aggressor. Mr. Grayson has used his monopoly on propane distribution to exploit Meadowbrook residents, and my client was simply trying to protect her community." Sarah was on her feet immediately. "Your Honor, Mrs. Henderson has filed multiple false police reports, made threatening statements, vandalized HOA property, and escalated her harassment even after being removed from her position. Mr. Grayson has done nothing but operate his legally licensed business." Judge Carlson held up a hand. "I've reviewed the documentation submitted by both parties. Mrs. Henderson, do you deny making the statement, 'You're going to regret this,' to Mr. Grayson on January 24th? Patricia stood up, ignoring her lawyer's attempt to pull her back down. "I said that because he deserves to regret it. He's been gouging us for months, taking advantage of his monopoly. Someone had to stand up to him." "Mrs. Henderson, sit down," Judge Carlson said sternly. "Mr. Grayson's business license and pricing practices are not at issue here. What is at issue is your behavior toward him. You filed false police reports that wasted law enforcement resources. You've made threatening statements. You've been arrested for vandalizing HOA property in retaliation for decisions you disagreed with. This pattern of behavior constitutes harassment." "But Mrs. Henderson, I'm not finished. Your attorney should have advised you to remain silent. But since you seem determined to speak, let me be very clear. Nothing Mr. Grayson has done justifies your conduct. If you had legitimate complaints about his business practices, the appropriate recourse was to file a complaint with the Public Service Commission or pursue civil litigation. Instead, you've engaged in a campaign of harassment that has now resulted in criminal charges. Do you understand the seriousness of your situation?" Patricia's face crumpled, and she started crying. Her lawyer looked mortified. Judge Carlson waited for her to compose herself before continuing. "I'm granting the restraining order. Mrs. Henderson, you are prohibited from contacting Mr. Grayson directly or indirectly, from coming within 500 feet of his property or business facility, and from making any further complaints or reports about him to law enforcement or government agencies unless you have genuine, verifiable evidence of wrongdoing. Violations of this order will result in arrest and additional charges. Do you understand?" Patricia nodded mutely, tears streaming down her face. "Furthermore, I'm ordering a mental health evaluation. Mrs. Henderson, your behavior suggests you may be experiencing some kind of crisis. The court wants to ensure you get appropriate help. This evaluation is mandatory, and your compliance will be a factor if you go to trial on the burglary charges." The hearing wrapped up quickly after that. Sarah and I walked out of the courthouse into the cold January air, and I felt like I could breathe again for the first time in weeks. "That went about as well as we could have hoped," Sarah said. "Judge Carlson took this seriously, and the mental health evaluation was smart. Patricia clearly needs help. What happens now? The restraining order is in effect for 2 years unless she violates it, in which case she'll be arrested. The criminal charges for the HOA burglary are a separate matter. She'll probably take a plea deal, given that the evidence is overwhelming. My guess is she'll get probation, community service, and mandatory counseling. But that's not our concern anymore. You're protected, and you can go back to running your business in peace. The rest of that week felt almost surreal in its normalcy. I made deliveries, maintained my equipment, and dealt with routine business matters. The Meadowbrook contract was working smoothly. Elaine had taken over as permanent HOA president, and she was competent and reasonable to work with. I heard through the grapevine that Patricia had moved out of Meadowbrook. Her husband had apparently had enough of the drama and chaos, and they'd listed their house for sale. The mental health evaluation had resulted in a diagnosis of obsessive-compulsive disorder and recommended treatment. Patricia was reportedly in therapy and on medication. I felt a complicated mix of emotions about that. Part of me was angry at everything she'd put me through, but another part felt something like pity. She'd clearly been struggling with mental health issues, and her fixation on me and the propane situation had been a symptom of something deeper. I hoped she got the help she needed. February arrived with slightly warmer weather and longer days. The propane business continued as usual, which was exactly what I wanted. No drama, no headlines, just steady work and satisfied customers. One afternoon in mid-February, Elaine Otterman stopped by my facility. She'd brought coffee and pastries from a bakery in town. "Peace offering," she said with a smile. "Though honestly, you're the one who deserves apologies from all of us." "You've got nothing to apologize for, Elaine. You were trying to fix Patricia's mess from the start." We sat in my office drinking coffee, and Elaine updated me on Meadowbrook developments. The HOA had implemented new bylaws limiting the president's authority and requiring board approval for major decisions. They'd hired a professional management company to handle day-to-day operations, and they were working on rebuilding the community's reputation after the fiasco with Patricia. "People really appreciate your service, Marcus. You could have held grudges after everything that happened, but you've been nothing but professional. That means a lot." "I just want to do my job and be left alone," I said honestly. "No interest in drama or revenge. Life's too short." "Well, you've earned a lot of respect in Meadowbrook. Several residents told me they're planning to nominate you for the county's Small Business Award. I hope you'll accept if that happens." I laughed. Let's not get carried away. But I appreciate the sentiment. After Elaine left, I sat in my office looking out at the propane tanks and the Montana landscape beyond. Buck was sleeping under my desk, snoring softly. Everything was exactly as it should be. The legal proceedings against Patricia Henderson concluded in late March. She pleaded guilty to criminal mischief and was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and mandatory mental health counseling. She was also ordered to pay restitution to the HOA for the damage she'd caused. The judge made it clear that any further violations would result in jail time. I didn't attend the sentencing hearing. Sarah Chen represented my interests and filled me in afterward. She said Patricia had made a brief statement accepting responsibility and apologizing for her actions. Her lawyer emphasized that she was getting treatment and making progress with her mental health issues. "She seemed genuinely remorseful," Sarah told me. "Whatever was going on with her, I think she's getting the help she needs now. With any luck, this is the end of the whole mess." It was. The restraining order remained in effect, but there were no violations. Patricia completed her community service at a local food bank and stayed in treatment. Eventually, her house sold, and she and her husband moved to Idaho. I heard they were doing better, trying to rebuild their lives away from the painful memories of Meadowbrook. As for me, life returned to normal. The propane business continued successfully. The Meadowbrook contract provided steady income without any drama. I even hired a second part-time employee, a retired firefighter named Bill, who knew his way around safety systems and enjoyed the work. Spring arrived in Montana with its usual mix of rain and stubborn snow. The days got longer, and I spent more time working on my property, repairing fences and clearing brush. Buck chased rabbits through the fields, happy as always. One evening in late April, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset when my phone rang. It was Tom Breslin, the Meadowbrook resident who'd first warned me about Patricia's email back in January. "Marcus, I just wanted to thank you again for everything. My family's been warm all winter, thanks to your service, and I wanted you to know the community really does appreciate how you handled that whole situation with patience and professionalism." "Thanks, Tom. I appreciate that." Also, I wanted to give you a heads up. The County Commission is holding a hearing next month about propane distribution licenses in the valley. Some developer wants to build another facility east of Route 47. I thought you might want to know. Another facility? That's outside my licensed area anyway. Yeah, but they're also asking the Commission to reconsider the single-source distribution policy for your area. They're arguing it's outdated and anti-competitive. I felt a familiar tension creep into my shoulders. Who's behind this? Some investment group from California. I don't think it's connected to Patricia or anything like that. Just developers trying to make money, but I figured you'd want to be aware. I appreciate the heads up, Tom. I'll look into it. After we hung up, I sat on the porch for a long time, thinking. The propane distribution license had been challenged before and had survived. It would probably survive again. But the fight with Patricia Henderson had taught me something important. There would always be someone who thought they knew better, who wanted to change things for their own benefit, who couldn't accept that some systems existed for good reasons. I wasn't worried, though. I had documentation, legal precedent, and the support of the community. More importantly, I knew I was running a good business that served people well. That was worth fighting for if it came to it. Buck padded out onto the porch and sat beside me, watching the last light fade from the sky. I scratched behind his ears and smiled. Just another day in Montana, boy. Just another day. The county commission hearing happened in late May. I attended with Sarah Chen, prepared to defend my facility's licensing if necessary. The California Investment Group made their pitch, arguing for deregulation and competition. They had slick presentations and economic projections showing how much money everyone could save. But the commission had heard it all before. They listened politely, then called on the county fire marshal to explain why the single-source policy existed. He laid out the history, the dangerous terrain, the harsh winters, the 1994 fire that had killed 3 people when multiple propane trucks collided on an icy mountain road. The single-source policy wasn't about limiting competition. It was about preventing tragedies. The commission voted unanimously to maintain the existing licensing structure. My facility's exclusive distribution rights remained intact. The California investors were disappointed but professional about it. They'd tried, they'd failed, and they moved on to the next opportunity. Walking out of that hearing, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not because I'd won some kind of competition, but because the system had worked. Good policy, based on sound reasoning and real history, had prevailed over slick marketing and abstract economic theory. The people who actually lived in this valley, who understood its challenges and risks, had made the decision that protected everyone. Summer arrived in Montana with wildflowers and long, warm days. The propane business slowed down, as it always did in warm weather. I used the time to do major maintenance, upgrade some equipment, and take a few days off to go fishing. Meadowbrook had settled into being just another customer, no different from the dozens of other communities and homes I served. Elaine Otterman ran the HOA competently, and I never heard from them unless there was a routine business matter to discuss. It was exactly what I'd wanted from the beginning, a professional relationship based on fair terms and mutual respect. One afternoon in August, I was working on one of the storage tanks when I saw a car pull up to my facility. It was a rental, and the driver was a middle-aged woman I didn't recognize. She got out tentatively, looking around like she wasn't sure she was in the right place. "Can I help you?" I called out. "Are you Marcus Grayson?" "That's me." She walked closer, and I could see she'd been crying recently. "My name is Linda Henderson. I'm Patricia's sister." I tensed immediately, but I kept my voice neutral. "Okay. I wanted to come talk to you in person. Patricia asked me to come, actually. She wanted me to apologize to you on her behalf." She could have written a letter. The restraining order prohibits direct contact, and she didn't want to risk violating it. But she felt like you deserved a real apology, not just a form letter from her lawyer. Linda took a deep breath. "What my sister did to you was wrong. She knows that now. She was dealing with undiagnosed mental health issues, and she fixated on you in a really unhealthy way. The treatment she's gotten has helped her understand how irrational and harmful her behavior was. I appreciate you coming all this way to tell me that. How is Patricia doing?" "Better. She's still in therapy. still on medication. She and her husband are trying to rebuild their marriage. It's been hard, but they're making progress. Patricia wanted you to know that she takes full responsibility for what happened, and she hopes someday you can forgive her. I thought about that for a moment. Tell Patricia I don't hold grudges. What happened was difficult, but it's over now. I hope she continues to get the help she needs and that things work out for her and her family. Linda's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. That means more than you know. She left shortly after that, driving back down the mountain road toward whatever came next. I watched her go, feeling like a final chapter had closed on the whole strange saga. Buck came over and leaned against my leg, and I bent down to pet him. What do you think, boy? Are we finally done with HOA drama? Buck wagged his tail enthusiastically, and I chose to take that as a yes. The years that followed were peaceful and productive. The propane business continued to thrive. I expanded slightly, adding another storage tank and upgrading my delivery trucks. Bill became a full-time employee, and I hired a part-time office assistant to help with paperwork and scheduling. Meadowbrook grew and evolved. New families moved in, the community matured, and the HOA functioned smoothly under Elaine's leadership. Eventually, Elaine stepped down and someone else took over, and the transition was drama-free and professional. That's how things were supposed to work. I never saw or heard from Patricia Henderson again. The restraining order expired after 2 years, but there was no contact. As far as I knew, she'd built a new life in Idaho and left the past behind. That was fine with me. Looking back on that cold January when everything exploded, I realized I'd learned some important lessons about standing up for yourself when you're in the right, about the importance of good legal counsel, about how mental health issues can manifest in destructive ways, and about how most conflicts, even bitter ones, eventually resolve if you stay patient and professional. My father called me one evening from Arizona, having heard about the county commission hearing through the local news. "Sounds like you've been having an interesting time up there," he said with amusement in his voice. "You could say that. Nothing I couldn't handle. I built that facility to serve the community and keep people safe. Sounds like you're doing the same thing. I'm proud of you, son." That meant more to me than any business award or legal victory could. I was carrying on something important, something that mattered, not because I had a monopoly or because I was making huge profits, but because I was providing an essential service reliably and safely. The propane facility my grandfather had started in the 1970s, that my father had expanded and legitimized, that I now operated, would continue serving this valley for years to come. Through harsh winters and regulatory challenges, through difficult customers and legal battles, the work would go on. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't about HOA politics or business disputes. It was about making sure families stayed warm through Montana winters. Everything else was just noise. I stood in my office one last time that evening, looking out at the tanks and mountains, with Buck sleeping peacefully under my desk. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere in Meadowbrook, people were coming home from work, cooking dinner, living their lives without worrying about where their propane came from or whether their heat would work. That was exactly how it should be. That was the job done right. And I was content with that. More than content. Grateful for the opportunity to do meaningful work in a place I loved, serving a community that needed reliable service and fair dealing. The mid-January discovery that I controlled the only propane facility serving their HOA had turned into the biggest drama of my professional life. But it had also reinforced everything I believed about running a good business. Be fair, be consistent, stand your ground when you're right, and treat people with respect, even when they don't return the favor. Patricia Henderson had discovered my control over propane distribution the hard way, and it had triggered a crisis that spiraled out of control. But in the end, the system worked. Good policy prevailed, reasonable people found solutions, and someone who needed help got it. I turned off the office lights and headed home with Buck trotting beside me. Tomorrow would bring new deliveries, new customers, new challenges. But tonight, I was just a man walking home through the Montana twilight, satisfied with a job well done and ready for whatever came next. The propane business would go on. The community would continue to grow. And somewhere, maybe, Patricia Henderson was finding peace in her new life, having learned the same hard lessons I had about accepting reality and working within systems that exist for good reasons. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.